Welcome to the Water People podcast. I'm Lauren Hill, and my co-host is Dave Rastovich. Today we're in conversation with shark expert, underwater photographer, and conservationist Valerie Taylor. Valerie is an Australian icon whose life's work has become the basis for much of what we know about sharks today. Her life is chronicled in the new documentary Playing with Sharks, which traces Valerie's career trajectory from champion spearfisher to passionate shark protector. Valerie Taylor is like an underwater astronaut. She and her husband Ron really pioneered underwater cinematography and photography in the 1960s. They shot thousands of hours of underwater imagery, and they really brought the underwater world to mainstream media in a way that it had never really been experienced before. Ron and Valerie also captured some of the most iconic and paradigm-shifting underwater imagery, including the real-life great white footage cut into Steven Spielberg's Jaws. I feel like Jaws is one of the most impactful modern films in terms of shaping how we think about and interact with the ocean. Do you? I mean, I remember being scared of sharks coming out of the pool drain as a kid, which makes no sense. And I'm not sure if that was the result of seeing Jaws too early, but did it shape your early understanding of sharks?
That's funny, because I remember a movie probably from the 80s, a tragic kind of thriller, maybe it was just some sort of wannabe Jaws movie about alligators coming out of toilets in Florida. And I actually got really scared for a while as a tiny little kid, thinking that crocodiles would come out of the toilet sometimes. and I guess it's, that's a silly thing, but it's also indicative of how impactful those thrillers are, and that they're fictional, and they're these stories that were made up. And the Jaws one, I remember just never wanting to see it, because I remember hearing about how freaked out it made people and blah, blah, blah. And I just, I was terrified of Michael Jackson's Thriller as a kid. So I was very easily scared by things like that.
You still are, really?
Yeah, I am.
In some ways.
Yeah, I never watch any thrillers or anything like that. I will never go near that sort of thing. But I purposefully steered clear of Jaws. I don't really think I've ever properly sat down and watched the whole thing.
It's interesting that the film had the impact that it has had, sticking in so many of our mind's eyes. So many people who go and visit the ocean, have some of those scenes embedded on their minds when they're walking into the ocean. And I can't imagine that Valerie or Ron would have been so thrilled about the impact that the film has had. In fact, they went on a PR tour after the movie came out because it was having such a massive impact and making so many people so terrified of sharks in the ocean that they had to go and kind of try to put fires out and talk about how sharks really are playful and creatures just deserving of respect, not necessarily outright and irrational fear.
Or love. When we're speaking to her, we're like, why do you love sharks? She's like, I don't love sharks. I just respect them. And that, I think, was really indicative of her frankness and her honesty and her straight-upness. She was a real delight to talk to and a real breath of fresh air in that way, and that not a polished, politically correct, contrived media personality at all. She's just saying how she is. She's, in the last however many years of her life, she's still fighting fit and everything, but she is at that, sunset period of life.
She's 85.
Yeah. So, she's just telling it how she sees it.
And that makes me want to bring up the fact that she expresses some cultural biases, some might interpret as cultural insensitivities that I think reflect the time and the culture from which she grew. And, when we make the podcast, we have to make calls about what to include and what to cut out. But we felt like it was true to Valerie's story to leave in the entirety of those thought streams, even if they don't necessarily reflect how we think or feel about some of those same issues.
Yeah. Yeah, she talks about specific countries involved in industrial scale fishing efforts that have decimated parts of the planet. And while, that is true, it is also true that the same type of commercial fishing industries in Australia, in New Zealand, in Africa, in America, in South America, everywhere that industrialised fishing has happened has been that way. She singles out just a couple nations, but it was and is pervasive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Valerie's best known, in my mind, for being on the cover of National Geographic, being bitten by a blue shark to test out a mesh chainmail suit that she and her partner Ron basically came up with the idea of, to try to get closer, to have more intimate interactions with sharks. And yeah, she's been bitten, I think she says hundreds of times.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty unique experience.
Yeah, so great.
In a life.
Yeah, just such a rich life and you know, just a fullness, a willingness to give things a crack. And, you know, I've really enjoyed her book, and there's a part in the book that we didn't really talk about with her, but where she turned from being someone that was pretty comfortable with using a power head on any shark to kill them, basically, in the water, to going back to Seal Rocks one time where some people had, or a kind of semi-rival in filmmaking or something, had gone there just before them, knowing that they were about to get there, and had killed all the sharks, and they were grey nurses. And when Ron and Valerie got there to do some filming, all the sharks had been killed and were just, you know, floating in a scene of tragedy, and that she vowed from that point on, and since then has never killed another shark. And so just a really fascinating story, not one of theory, not one of hypotheticals, just first-hand experience, and like first-hand experience of things like the Barrier Reef at a time when no one had seen it to the depth and intricacy that her and Ron had over many, many months and many subsequent expeditions there. So a perspective of the abundance of ecology before modern industrialized impacts of us, all of us, decimating these places, and the shifting baselines that have happened ever since. And when she says, oh, people say they see a school of kingfish and there's like a dozen or so in there, she just sort of laughs and speaks of times where kingfish were so plentiful she'd see them coming overhead and they'd block out the sun. They'd have to wait for so long to take a picture because there was so many fish in the water. So like just a scale of life that she has been able to live through that, and then now what it is in a lot of places, which is a sort of a fraction of that abundance.
Yeah, I love her story because, and there's a new documentary out about her life called Playing with Sharks, and I love seeing that film because she's such an example of a kind of experiential expert. You know, she didn't go and get degrees. She didn't, like you said, learn about the theoretical. She just followed her curiosities. And also, and she's honest about this, she followed where the money was for shooting photos underwater, for making films underwater. And she ended up mostly being portrayed by kind of male-dominated media of the 60s and 70s as a kind of blonde bombshell, Bond girl of the ocean kind of figure. And she kind of played into it with her bright pink wetsuit and her bright pink hair ribbon that she always wore. That was kind of her signature. But there's not a lot of her voice and her perspective included in a lot of those early documents of Ron and Valerie's contributions to marine culture and marine conservation. I mean, they're responsible for creating large swaths of marine protected areas in Australia, and they helped ban fishing with apparatus using scuba, I think, in Australia. So they've done some really important work in the marine conservation area, and her new film is just a really insightful look into a story that has kind of been overlooked in some ways. I really drew the comparison in seeing the film with Steve Irwin and his contributions in bringing wildlife to people's homes. That's what Valerie and Ron were doing on a global scale.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
It's an absolute honor to sit in the presence of such an incredible, adventurous water woman. Thank you for laying that legacy.
Well, I wasn't thinking of leaving a legacy. I was just having a great life and trying to do very good things at the same time, because very early in the piece, when I was in my 20s, well, I was a spearfisher. I was the Australian champion twice and the Pacific Cup once, won them. And I realised that we were making a huge difference to marine life off the coast. At the Australian Spearfishing Championships, the last one I entered was out of Maroochydore, and there was an island offshore. When we first went there, fish everywhere. When we left, no large or edible fish left. And I thought, what have we done? And Ron said, you're looking at all the dead fish, thousands of fish. And he said, I don't want to do this anymore. And I said, I don't either. And we both won our titles. And we both walked away and never did it again.
Wow.
It was a long time ago. We walked away at the top, not because we were at the bottom. And I've been very keen on conservation on land and in the ocean ever since.
Mm. What a first-hand experience.
Well, the first thing I had passed ever by law was not allowed to take fish using scuba. Not allowed to take anything except abalone. I think abalone's the only one using scuba.
Mm.
Wow.
No, abalone, they can't. It's a business.
Mm.
Don't know how they run it now. I haven't seen an abalone for years.
Mm.
In your book, Valerie, you say that you've spent your life documenting the Anthropocene,
Yes.
which is such a beautiful and succinct way to put it. There's this concept now called shifting baseline syndrome.
Yes, that's right, yes. And I don't like it. However, if a young person goes into the ocean with a mask, snorkel and fins, they will think it's wonderful.
Mm.
They will think this is incredible. And they will never know how it used to be. They can never know.
Can you describe what we can't imagine? How was it different? This is one of the reasons why I was so
The
excited.
school of fish is so huge, it never seems to pass. Ron used to complain about schools of kingfish going overhead because he used natural light for his photography and putting a shade over whatever he was trying to film and waiting there. We'd be sitting around there waiting. They'd keep coming and keep coming. You don't see that anymore. They now think 20 kingfishers a school, not 120 or 1,020. That's gone. I still do see on occasions, well, the last big school of fish I saw were tailor, and the fishermen were waiting on the beach to net them. That's a bad thing they do. They net the breeding aggregations, and they're allowed to.
Mm.
A farmer doesn't kill all his pregnant cows and expects calves next year.
Mm.
And the fishermen can't complain because of fishing restrictions. They're now getting permission to go into the marine sanctuary zones. The marine part's always been open to commercial fishing.
Mm.
It's just two words. And it's got to have national in it, a marine national park. So I've had my day. It's been a very good one. I've seen the ocean in many areas of the world, how nature intended it to be, not what man has done to it. And that makes me know how important it is to try and have some areas totally protected.
Mm.
We all need somewhere to live, love and breed.
Do you have any examples of those protected areas that you've seen working and proving how important they are that you can think of?
There's only one that I know well, and it's off Manly. It's called Shelley Beach. We used to spearfish there, and it's totally protected. You're not even allowed to anchor a boat in there. And that's about as close as you'll ever get to how it used to be. And you do see good sharks in there too. Dusky whalers come in, excite all the snorkelers.
It's so great. I wish a camera could show people listening right now how your face just lit up when you spoke of sharks. Because we're the same when we start speaking about waves and surfing, and we can talk and talk, but then when we start talking about that which we love so much, you see it on our faces.
I don't love them. I just respect them.
Yeah.
It hurts me that this huge animal, it can be so disliked. It doesn't come up on the beach and eat people or bite people or chase you up the street. If you want to stay away from sharks, don't swim where they live. Don't go into their territory, their home. We're just intruders. We don't belong there.
Sharks are pretty remarkable. They were around before trees, according to the fossil record. They've basically remained unchanged for millions of years.
Yes, that's true.
Have lived through at least 4 mass extinctions over the last 450 million years. What sparked your initial fascination with playing with sharks?
Well, I don't play with them. I just respect them. That's the name the film was given. When I used to spearfish, we always had a lot of trouble with sharks. There were a lot more sharks around. And you learnt how to keep them off your fish. You learnt that if you stood up to them, they'd back off. They're not used to their prey standing up to them. Neither does a lion or a tiger expect its prey to turn around and attack. And I realised they were just big fish living the life nature intended them to live. And we were the intruders. And if we didn't like their behaviour, don't go into their territory. Simple as that. We make the decision ourselves. Like you make the decision to drive your car, a bus might run over you, but the decision to drive the car was yours. If you don't want to run the risk, don't go in your car. Don't go in the water.
You made the decision over and over to be in their space, to choose to be around them. What made you keep coming back to frolic in their
money
habitat?
No, say it isn't so.
When we started, I mean, it was a long time ago, and Movie Tone News had little theatrettes around the world in which they would show the news of the world for sixpence. It lasted about half an hour to an hour. And we found that Movie Tone News would buy Ron's black and white 16mm footage and blow it up to 35mm and put it in the theatrettes. This is a long time ago. They would pay us £35 an item, a month's wages back then. And they didn't want minnows or coral polyps or oysters. They wanted sharks. Now, sharks were not known much in the rest of the world. And so we went out looking for sharks all the time, because if we could get a good sequence, especially if I was fluttering around amongst them in a bathing costume, Movie Tone News would buy it, blow it up to 35 and send it around the world. That's really what got us started into sharks. Before that, they were just a big fish with a lot of teeth, or a sloppy-looking fish that lay on the floor of the ocean. There are hundreds of different species of shark. And it seems that the human race has zeroed in to just disliking a few. And they're all in the carcharoid family, and they're all ones with teeth. They have a job to perform, and they do it well, so you can't really blame them for that. I know if we don't have any sharks, the ocean will suffer, and as a consequence, so will we. On land and in the ocean, there are the top predators. There are people who clean up the streets. We're the top predator. And in the ocean, there are sharks that clean up the dead and the dying and the unwary, and they keep the species stronger. So if they're not there, I think now there won't be much in the way of species either, except very small fish. We're just overfishing at an accelerating rate. But if we stopped, it would all go back to how it was, I'd say, in 10 years. It's just that we won't stop. Like I said, they're free for the taking. And China has the biggest fishing fleet in the world, and they harvest everything that is edible, including jellyfish. I know I was in China and they offered me a jellyfish. Oh, it was cooked and flat. But you can't take and expect nature to repair the damage. She won't. She'll do her best, but she can't. If you harvest breeding aggregations, you can't expect to keep doing it year after year. They're disappearing. I know I have a house, a place called Seal Rocks. It was a fishing village. There's no fishermen there now. Guess who they blame for no fish? The divers. So I went down to their co-op when they were having their beers after a day out to sea, and I walked in and I said, I just want to talk to you guys. If the divers and the snorkelers frightened away your fish, Ron and I couldn't make a living in the ocean filming them. And Spike got up and said, we're not talking about you, Valerie. We're not talking about you and Ron. It's all those other people. And I said, they behave the same as we do, probably less aggressive because we go after something we want to film. Yeah, it's just lack of knowledge, greed, and apathy. The three words I'd put onto the depletion of marine life. The oceans are full of plastic. I've been to islands now, same case really, where once it was pristine, now they're covered in plastic garbage. Isolated islands where no one lives are covered in plastic garbage along the coast. And that's the human race. If we kill the oceans, we'll die, there's no doubt. They're worried about CO2, there's all this fuss, global warming. The ocean and the planet in itself has warmed and frozen many times through its history. It has naturally got warmer and naturally got colder. In the last ice age, the only place on the planet free of ice was the Raja Ampat area up near the equator, and the only reason for that was it had a lot of active volcanoes. Kept the temperature up, it still does. It's lovely. And that's just the way it's going. It's going to get warmer, but then it'll get colder. And global warming isn't unusual. I would say that the human race is making it happen faster. There's no doubt about that. But get used to it, kiddo. It's going to happen. Whatever you do, you can't fight the planet. And that's the way it's going to be. You can slow it down, I guess. But the thing that is the most important aspect of keeping our air clean are trees. As you probably know, they breathe in pollutants, CO2 and other things. They breathe out oxygen. So what do? We cut them all down. The national parks wrote me a letter and said, would I buy a certain number of trees, little trees, for so much money? I think it was $10 a tree. And I wrote back and said, no, I'll give you $100 for every tree you stop being cut down. No answer. Yeah. Because those little trees aren't going to make it like we think they will. They won't be a big tree for 20 years, and then not a very big tree. Meanwhile, all around the world, rainforests, temperate zone forests, all sorts of forests are being cut down and not replaced. And they're picking on the cattle. It's not the cattle's fault. Yeah. They are picking on people who eat meat. It's not the people who eat meat. It's the people who want a nice kauri tree to make a table. They're cutting down the forest much faster than anyone else. I don't think in Australia we're clearing land for farmland anymore. Not around where I live anyway. No. And the fires did a bit of clearing for us, but that was because of the lack of care of the forest floor. My holiday house is surrounded by a national park, and Ron and I used to go walking in it, and we'd be almost up to our knees in leaf litter. A lot of leaf litter. Mm. And that's, once it's on fire, it's hard to hold. Mm.
Valerie, I'm interested in your relationship with pain. In your book, you write about your early experience rehabilitating through polio, and you wrote that pain embeds and perseveres. It informs and guides. It can bring an atheist to faith or a churchgoer to despair. You, over the years, have had some toothsome encounters with fish.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how that pain, the physical pain in your body from those experiences, was similar or not similar at all to the pain of your early life.
The pain of polio is far greater than the pain of a shark biting your leg. Actually, there's no pain at all. It comes later. The pain of your bones shrinking and your muscles tightening up, and there's nothing to be done. You just lie there in pain. That's terrible. It's like lying on the ground after a car accident with a broken back and there's no help for you. And I was only 12. But the very young children, they all died. We were all in the one huge room, men, women and children. I have to handle pain. I've got arthritis and it's painful. And you can probably see me sitting here doing this with my hands. They're starting to hurt because it's cold. I think most people suffer a certain amount of pain, whether it's mental or physical. And it's not much you can do about it except take a painkiller.
Valerie, I was, just to skip back a second, I'm curious about what you would suggest in terms of ways to stop the crazy amount of extraction out of the ocean with fishing practices. Would you say we need to stop commercial fishing for a period, or recreational and commercial fishing, or have you got any other ideas around how we might be able to take a path forward?
Get out a big gun and blow all the fishing fleets out of the water. That would be a good start.
So you're probably a fan of Paul Watson and Sea Shepherd then?
No, not really.
He might be happy to hear you say something like that.
No, I don't think we can do anything. We can't. Australia could, but so what? We're a small country compared to China. Mm. They like fish. They have stopped importing cattle from Australia, so they probably want more fish out of the ocean. They have the biggest fishing fleet in the world. I went up to Papua New Guinea. The last dive trip I did was into Papua New Guinea, and went to an area in Milne Bay that had always been one of our favourite places for sharks and fish. Nothing. In 2 weeks, not a shark and not a big fish. Mm. The government had allowed the Chinese to come in and fish, and they're very efficient at it. Mm. They long line and they net. They do all sorts of things. Mm. The local village people, we only went to one village, they were very upset because they couldn't go out and catch a tuna for the village or for the family anymore. They're gone. A well-constructed, managed fishing boat can really make a huge difference to an area. And when you've got many hundreds, thousands of fishing boats, The difference they're making is horrific. I don't know what's going to happen. I won't be around to see it, but it's not going to be nice. Your little boy, he's going to see it. And they're talking about teaching us to eat insects. Come on. Is anybody going to sit down to a plate of witchetty grubs? Well, they're good. I've tried those. They taste like brains if you like brains. And I like brains. Well, I was a child during the war in a very isolated place. We didn't have a butcher shop. We had to get what we could from the farmer. All the meat was going overseas. When I say we didn't have a butcher shop, he was there, but he didn't have much. But we could get all offal. So I like all offal except tripe.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where was that? Where was your
I was in Lower Hutt, New Zealand.
Oh, wow.
I'm not a New Zealander, but I grew up there. My father went to New Zealand to build a battery factory, and war broke out and we couldn't come back. It was as simple as that. So we stayed there. And I had a good childhood. I don't want to go back there to live. It's too cold, too windy, and rains too much. But I had a good childhood.
Yeah.
Valerie, I have some disdain for a certain word, and I was reading your book last night and feel like you may share it with me, and that word is wife. I'm not a fan of the word wife. It's not something that I've ever wanted or aspired to.
Wife?
Yeah, I was just reading about your first experience with marriage.
Yes.
And what it taught you about the expectations.
God, that was terrible then. Why? I grew up in an area a time when you never, ever had sex outside of marriage. That was a shame on the family. And I wanted to have sex. And he was good looking and he was very attentive, so I married him. I didn't think about washing his dirty socks and cleaning his dirty clothes and having special food demanded. He wanted steak, but he never gave me money. I worked at the same time. And I was thinking, this marriage isn't much good. I don't like being his wife, but I liked being Ron's wife.
I love in the film that the beautiful partnership you and Ron have that's based on this mutual love and fascination with the underwater world. It's such a beautiful and rare story of non-competitive partnership. It seems like you were emboldening and empowering each other in your work.
Yes.
Have you found that dynamic rare in your experience over time between a man and his wife and a woman and her husband?
No, I know other couples who work in the ocean and they each have a job to do and it meshes, it makes a partnership. No, I don't understand that. I don't understand why you don't like the word wife. It's almost like saying you don't like the word slave.
It's had that connotation. It's also had a connotation of property, and that makes me a bit uncomfortable.
I never thought of that. I might add the guy I married first, he thought I was his property. I knew within 1 year that I'd made a big, big mistake.
I feel so lucky to be with a man, it seems like Ron was, who was supporting you in your desire for adventure.
Yeah, Ron and I had a good partnership. We each knew what we could do without upsetting the other, and we each knew what needed to be done to make a living together. And I stuck with mine. I mean, I've only picked up the movie camera a few times. That wasn't my job. That was Ron's role. I used the still camera. But one time I did pick up the movie camera, it was during Jaws.
The filming of Jaws.
How did that go?
Oh, he was underwater, he didn't know. Until it was all developed.
I saw that footage that you captured of this beautiful big fish
That's all my footage.
Destroying this diving cage.
So the only time you shot with a moving camera was that footage?
No, I've shot
That's a good strike rate.
I shot a few things, but he wasn't happy with me. I don't know why. He was very possessive of his film, his movie cameras. I wasn't possessive of the still camera. I often gave it to him and posed for him. Done. That's okay.
Are there any sort of highlight stories for you that you think of when someone asks you, is there a moment that stands out above all other moments underwater for you in your life? Was that at an early age? Was there a moment where something clicked, or have you had any of those moments that felt like a real peak moment more so than others underwater?
When we managed to get the first shark to bite on the mesh suit, yeah. We tried and they wouldn't. They'd bump me and go away. And so then we got the idea of using tuna fillets under the mesh, eventually, just put under the mesh. And the first good bite was a blue shark in the open ocean. We were ecstatic. Didn't take my arm. I didn't even... I jerked my arm, but they don't have the crush power that scientists claim. Nothing like it. I've been bitten hundreds of times in the mesh suit. The greatest scientists working with sharks in America told National Geographic, when we gave them the story, that it was a Taylor hoax. If a shark bit Valerie in the mesh suit, the imprint of the mesh would be on my bones. No. They pulled a story. So Ron sent them a roll of film, National Geographic, and the director rang back and he said, I'm going to give you the cover.
What a turnaround.
Yeah.
I was watching that incredible footage of the blue shark sort of mouthing your arm like a dog would, like we play with our dog Yogi. And I was wondering, you did this time after time and swam with much bigger fish than that. And I was wondering, was it bravery for you? Was it courage, or was it intoxication with this incredible unknown world?
Well, it was supposed to be Ron in the suit anyway, and he had it made for him, like you'd have a wetsuit, and he put it on and couldn't move because it doesn't stretch. That's why I was in that baggy, hanging off me all over the place suit. And I was interested. I was curious. I don't seem to have the normal fear that other people have. It's not there. Several times I thought I'm going to die, and I've accepted the fact that it could happen without any fear. And once I got pulled down in a whirlpool, and I thought, this is it.
In a whirlpool?
Yeah, it's really worrisome when you're going down and your air bubbles are with you. Half the time you can't see anything because you're surrounded by your own exhaust. And then suddenly hit the bottom and I suddenly started to go up.
Oh, too quick.
Oh, very quick.
Oh, wow.
But my husband says I'm unbendable.
Unbendable.
Well, I don't seem to take any notice of up and down, and I've never been bent.
Wow. What caused that whirlpool then?
It was in Indonesia. It was in Sapi Strait, Lontar Rock, and a great current goes through it. And I was in the lee of the rock, and I got out of it, and when it hits the rock, it goes over it and pushes down and causes a whirlpool. The Lontar whirlpool. I went up and I was just slowing down, and I think I haven't the air to go down again. It was very deep. And I swam like mad, and I saw a hand coming out of the dory on the surface, and I grabbed it, and it was Ron. He pulled me out. But I've had similar things. I guess one of the biggest surprises was to come up from and dive on a reef in the middle of the Banda Sea and see the mothership going over the horizon. That was good.
And you were floating on your own?
Totally on my own.
Waving.
No, they wouldn't have hit me. They were so far away.
How did that end?
I had about 500 pounds of air. I knew the tide was going down, so I used up my air to build myself an island out of dead coral plates. I took off my weight belt and I took my 2 hair ribbons off, tied them to the weight belt, made an anchor because the current was very strong, anchored myself to my island and hung on.
For how long?
Oh, well, the ship sailed away. They had their lunch and didn't notice I wasn't there. And I had a nephew on board and my husband, and neither noticed I wasn't there. And I was looking around and I thought, when the tide goes out to about knee depth, which it did in this area, I could see an island called My Island, uninhabited, just a coral cay. And I thought, I'll get across the shallow reef, and I knew there was a channel between the reef and the island. I'd pick my place to jump in because it's always got a current, and swim like hell to get to the island. I'd had it all planned. Then I saw some zodiacs coming over the horizon. And I thought, they're coming to get me. But no. Mike McDowell would allow the crew to go fishing in the lunch hour, and they'd come back to fish the point of the reef. So I stood on my little island. There were 3 zodiacs, all with the crew. I started throwing water in the air because that's what you do in Indonesia. If you want to attract attention, you don't, you throw water. And I started throwing water and somebody saw me and I waved, threw more water, and one of the zodiacs picked me up and took me back to the mothership. It was the Asmara Lumba Lumba was the name of the mothership. And my husband said, oh, wondered where you were.
Wow. I feel like you could talk story for a long time.
I can tell stories forever because when you're the first, everything you do is unique, pretty much. I mean, I'm not saying other people have done that. Other people have been left behind, though.
Yeah. Well, Valerie, I wanted to just read out this one short passage here from your book where you say, the things that other people are fearful of, sharks and deep dives, strong currents, storms and wild waves tossing the dinghy around like a cork, they roll over me like a breeze. And I feel sad that so many young people today have little idea of the exciting world they live in. Young suburban folk who can't see the manageable reality of risk, only the images on the iPhones they hold in front of their faces.
That's a problem, I think, yes. They don't no longer looking for adventure and excitement.
Yeah. We dance that line where we are participating in the tech world. We're sitting with this recorder with you right now, but we try very adamantly to keep it all at arm's length, that world, and to be in the water every day and to be swimming, sailing, diving, surfing as consistently as possible, pretty much every day.
And to remember that that's the real world.
That's the real world.
Yes.
And I loved your line about manageable reality of risk, because it feels like that is perhaps something that is a real skill of yours, has been that understanding risk.
You got to not let the risk take over.
How do you do that?
You think of how to get out of the problem, get away from the problem.
So like your situation then where you created the little island and you had a plan for getting to the coral
I was
cay.
making my plan.
Yeah.
I knew one thing, that if you're ever left behind, don't go off into the ocean. Hang around that reef, stay on it no matter what, because when they look for you, that's where they'll go. Well, they never even got around to looking for me. But
But you had a plan.
I had a plan.
Anyway, yeah.
Yes.
And that's a big thing in surfing, is risk management.
Yes.
Is understanding that there is something there, you want to ride that big, beautiful wave.
I love reading books on surfing and seeing movies on surfing.
Sorry to interrupt the conversation, but we wanted to take a moment to recognize the generous folks who have supported us this season. The Water People podcast is brought to you by the fine folks at Sanook. In 1997, founder Jeff Kelly started out with one simple goal: to make people smile and to encourage them to pass it on. Sanuk has been advocating for a more playful and inclusive surfing culture for more than 2 decades, while crafting some of the comfiest footwear around. Thanks, Sanuk, for your support and for encouraging water people around the globe to protect their happy places. Learn more about Sanuk's partnership with the Surfrider Foundation at sanuk.com.
Thanks to Gary McNeil Concepts, who put together cosmic boards for cosmic people. Gaz's boards combine recycled and plant-based materials that are built to last without sacrificing performance. To learn more, head to GaryMcNeilConcepts.com.
When I was watching the film last night, I couldn't help but think of Steve Irwin and his sort of charismatic Aussie larrikin style of conservation and bringing people into loving wildness and other species in particular. Did you have any relationship with him? I just saw the legacy that you left.
Only with his family. They have invited me, well, him too, I suppose, to go and stay with them, Ron and I. We never did. The story around Steve Irwin, the one that was delivered, wasn't a true one. I was rung up early in the morning by Channel 7 saying, Steve Irwin's just been killed by a leopard ray. I said, that's impossible. How could it kill him? It doesn't have a sting in its tail. They said, well, that's the story, and we're going with it. And I thought, oh, that's all right. So I knew the vessel that he was on with his carer and a few other people, and the great marine biologist, scientist, diver person who wasn't any of those things in reality. And I got the story from the owner of the boat, who then rang one of his crew who he knew and got the true story. And I don't think I'm at liberty to tell you, but Steve was misled very much. You never swim up to a ray front on, ever. Why couldn't the great person on board who was being paid to be there, who I don't like, never did like, tell him that? First of all, the great person should have been in there to take care of him. And anyway, he's a hands-on guy. He swam up to this big ray. They're like this, big black rays. And he would have swum up to it, and the ray will always go over its head. You can go around and hang on to its tail and it can drag you around, no problem, but never get in front of it. When you're swimming up to it, you'll see it shuffling around, face you, because it can only sting over its head. Killed him. That's what it did. It wasn't attacking. I was sick of hearing people say he was attacked. He was not attacked. The ray was defending itself. And it was very unfortunate. Indeed, he was a good man.
In closing, you've given us some cause for hope and some cause for not so much hope with the state of our planet.
Yeah.
When people ask for advice or steps that we can all take to make sure our oceans stay healthy and alive, what do you say?
I don't feel there is much hope because of what I've seen in my lifetime. 60 years. And I've been arguing for at least 45 of them, maybe 50, trying to have things protected, trying to get areas protected. All I've done is go backwards. I have a little success, then they slide away from it. Now they're taking away all the protected marine areas, and that'll be the finish off the coast. In the Coral Sea, the islands out there were protected, and now the government has given them back to the fishermen, which are basically, in my day, they were Japanese fishermen out there. We can't do it. We can't control Asia. We can't control Africa. Or India. They can do as they like.
How about what we can control? Should we all not be eating fish?
No, I wouldn't say that. It's, you can always take a certain amount. It's just the fish that we take. You don't take breeding aggregations. That's terrible. We in Australia can protect our own waters. And if we did it properly, in 20 years' time, thousands of divers are coming here to see fish and sharks and things because they're nowhere else in the world except Brunei. Brunei's a small country. Quite a few years ago now, I was taken there with my girlfriend to speak to the people of Brunei that they couldn't or shouldn't take sharks and that no shark product was going to be sold. And the Sultan was a bit concerned because 19% of his population are Chinese. So they got an elderly woman from another country who knew that world to come and talk to them on television. Also a group of university students. And one of them stood up and said, what will the poor fishermen do if they can't hunt and kill sharks? I said, well, they better find out what they can do now because in 2 or 3 years there will no longer be any sharks to hunt or kill. So they stop now. There'll always be a few sharks out there. If they continue, there won't. Oh, sat down. One thing about Brunei, everybody speaks English. It's amazing.
Speaking to sharks, 100 million sharks a year were killed for 20 years.
Yes, only according to what I've been told, only 10% of the original shark population is left. That's what I've been told. And they're harvesting that 10%. But the thing that really, really, really worries me is this harvesting of krill. Every bird and animal in Antarctica relies directly or indirectly on krill. The whales are coming up and they're not as fat as they used to be. Thousands, millions of tons of krill are taken out from an egg to the shrimp about that long. 7 years, according to what I read on the computer, from egg. And that's a very slow rate. The krill, adult krill, will only live in water of 2 degrees or under. So it's no good for human consumption. When they pull it out of the water in the nets, it disintegrates to a certain extent. They can only use it for chook food, pig food, cattle food, and that's what it's for. They'll destroy all the birds, penguins, sea lions and whales by taking the krill. And nobody even thinks about it or knows about it. They'll think about it when it's too late, as seems to be the way of the human race.
How have you coped? With all of that information, how have you coped? What is it that keeps you waking up in the morning, considering it's been 40, 45 years of trying? And
I just keep trying. I still try.
Yeah.
I used to have good success once. I'm not a young, beautiful girl wandering in and asking to speak to the Prime Minister or the Premier or somebody, the Minister for the Environment. I'm just a little old lady who stumbles in. No, they're not interested. Well, actually, they are nowadays, but...
Well, it's their loss, but that's why we feel fortunate.
It's your loss, not mine. I've had the best of it, without a doubt.
Yeah, definitely.
What's your take on aging now? How does it feel to live through these decades as a water woman?
I don't like the world very much as it is now. I don't like computers and handphones and things like that because they take away the want and the ability or the necessity maybe to go and do something else like bushwalking, snorkeling, swimming, riding your bike around. Kids don't do that anymore. I got on a bus the other day and every single person in the bus but the driver was, and me. I don't do that. Yeah. I'm pretty hopeless with modern technology.
But you were across technology in your day. I mean, you were a photographer.
Yeah, oh yes, absolutely, yes.
With cutting edge housings, underwater filming. You were a pioneer in technology, actually.
We were a pioneer in that type of technology, yes. The biggest thing that ever happened to me was when Ron worked out how to adjust the lens in a camera, what to do, so I could do macro underwater. Oh. Nobody else could.
Oh, wow.
I was put on the cover of National Geographic holding the camera. Truly. I had a 28-page story. They'd never seen such photography.
Oh, my gosh.
Then they looked, in America, the camera people looked at that lens, what had happened, what he'd done, and they copied it, but they missed one thing. To this day, they've never got it. He adjusted it so I was doing macro on wide angle. They're doing macro on macro. So I always had a better field of vision.
Yeah, you would have much more in the picture.
Yeah.
Wow. That's great.
I still haven't got it.
Well done.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So great. We were just on Norfolk Island, and I flipped through your book and saw that you and Ron maybe didn't discover, but were the first maybe divers to go and dive in Sirius.
Didn't dive. We just swam out to sea. Nobody had ever known where the regular Sirius was. They'd look for it and didn't find it. And this old Tahitian man told us, we were sitting on a hill and he pointed out to sea. And we asked him if he knew where the Sirius was because he was the oldest man on the island. And he said, see that hump in the sea? We did. We could see a sort of wave thing. He said, there she be.
There she be.
And so we put on, they never do this today. The mast, snorkel and fins told no one and swam out to sea looking for it. And we swam and swam and swam, and I started to think, I don't like this. Like, Norfolk Island's a long way away, and suddenly there it was.
Wow.
And we went back and we went up and told the governor. He wouldn't believe us. And he had the glass-bottom boat picked up from the lagoon and put in the ocean, and we all went out to where Ron's pointing, and there it was. And it was only bits and pieces, and the big anchor. And he had the anchor pulled up. I think it's now at South Head in Sydney. That was in 1961.
Oh, wow.
Now, in the 1990s, somebody went out and found the wreck of the Sirius and the government gave them $10,000 for being clever. So Ron packed up some photos and sent to the government, to the department of whatever it was, but they never acknowledged it.
Wow.
Also sent a couple of magazine covers where I was posing on the anchor.
Wow.
So we did find it. Well, it wasn't lost in reality.
Yeah.
Because the old man pointed it out. So he knew where it was, and I suppose others knew where it was, but they would never have seen it. We swam in towards the reef. Of course, there was stuff, mostly anchors, and we could see cannon and things up against the reef, but to go in, we're on a snorkel and the waves were breaking. It's a coral reef. It would have been a bit dangerous. When we came back, I went to Canberra and went and read the ship's log. It's in the library there. It wasn't the captain's fault. There were two ships, the Supply and the Sirius. The Sirius was big and the Supply was small. And for 3 months they'd waited to take the supplies ashore for the people on the island, and they could never do it. It was just a penal colony. And they decided to go back to Sydney. As they turned around, the captain realised his biggest ship was going to take the wind from the sails of the Supply, which was a small ship. So although his anchor was up, he stood to let the supply have first wind, and the wind changed, and he couldn't get around quickly enough before going on the reef. And he knew it was going. He threw everything he had overboard, all the anchors, everything, stopped. You can see the trail of stuff, and 2 huge anchors, and they never held. Well, the chain broke on the one that I'm photographed on because it was like that. And he had his diary. One line in the diary was great. We threw such things as could swim into the ocean to save their own self from destruction. Oh. And I wonder what they threw.
Wow. Wow.
And then the island was in a worse state than ever because they were starving at this stage. And they had the crew and everybody made it into the lagoon.
Yeah.
And they had all these extra people.
Yep.
But it was pretty dire.
Yeah.
We were on Norfolk working on a project to basically witness the community moving to a circular economy and trying to deal with their waste in a more financially but also environmentally sound way. And I was so interested in your book. You wrote about how you grew up in a time before plastic.
Yes.
So many of us have a hard time imagining what that would be like now.
Plastic was going to be the wonder of the world. When it came, we all knew that. My father brought home some plastic, a piece of plastic, and said, "This is it." Well, look at it's done. We can live without plastic. Mum had 3 bags, net bags, one for meat, one for the greengrocer, and one for the grocer. That's what she shopped with.
Yeah. Yeah, the world was still turning. People were still living without plastic.
Yes.
Yeah.
We had a lot of things we didn't have.
What were you brushing your teeth with?
Salt.
And a cloth or something? Or?
No. They were wooden.
Yeah.
Toothbrush with pig's hair.
Yeah.
They were very stern pig's hair. And they were grey. And salt. And then came a jar of some pink stuff, and we used that. But I actually never saw toothpaste till we came back to Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a different world. You don't miss what you don't know.
Yeah. And for those of us who don't have grandparents who are able to tell us these stories, just like, I mean, it's shifting baseline syndrome again. We have no idea what the world was like just a few decades ago and what's possible outside of this narrow reality we've constructed for ourselves.
Well, we didn't have a fridge. We didn't have a dishwasher or a clothes washer. The milk came in big drums on a horse and cart, and you'd go out with your billy, and it was 2p a pint, and give the 2s over and fill up your billy. The fruit came the same way, and so did the bread. And I still cut the crusts off my bread because my mother made us cut the crusts off because the flies would sit in the horse dung and then sit on the bread. And both my brother and I still carefully cut.
Oh, so you don't... Okay, so...
I don't know why. It's all wrapped in plastic now.
That's classic.
Yeah. But there was none of those things. I did go and buy 3-string bags. They're good because you use them a few times, then you wash them and then you use them some more.
Thanks to Valerie for sharing some of her adventurous life story with us. To learn more, be sure to check out her new film, Playing with Sharks, which is now streaming online. Special thanks always to our sound engineer and in-house musician, Shannon Sol Carroll. On behalf of myself, Lauren Hill, and my partner in rhyme, Dave Rastovich, thanks for making the time to listen with us today. If you have a spare moment, please consider leaving a review of the podcast or sharing an episode with a friend. Both help us to find the best stories from our global community of water people. We'll be continuing today's conversation on Instagram, where we're at Water People Podcast. You can find every episode and some extras on our website, waterpeoplepodcast.com.